Today on Dungeon Bowl Battle of the Colleges, we're looking at the College of Fire. In recent seasons, they've been on a hot streak, but can they keep up this roaring form, or will they burn out? I've decided that all the teams competing in the Battle of the Colleges is going to have a similar dungeon-style base. These are all going to be made from milliput. This is a two-part epoxy putty that's worked together to create a malleable working sculpting material. Take equal parts of each of the milliput sausages and work them together for about 5 minutes. Once you have an even consistency, form a small ball of the milliput and press it onto the base. I found that wetting my finger helped to stop sticking and allowed me to get a pretty even layer across the base. Now to form the milliput into dungeon paving slabs. First, I took an old kitchen knife and scored lines into the milliput, keeping them fairly uniform. I also wet the tip of the knife, which again stops it sticking to the milliput as you're trying to drag it through. At the moment it doesn't look much like stone, however, so to texture it, I took some scrumpled up tinfoil and used this to press the milliput, giving it a pock-marked appearance. If you're impatient like me, you can use water to stop the milliput sticking, or you can wait until it's cured a bit before doing this step. I then came in to rescore my tile lines, as the texture work pretty much removed all trace of them, so for the future bases I'll do the texture first and then cut my tiles. All the dwarves for this team came on slaughter bases. I wasn't planning on using these, so I snipped off the parts around their feet where they attach to the base, and then also used a cocktail stick to push through the hole for the ball. The Gnoblar bases don't come with pre-drilled holes, so I added my own using a hobby drill. Lastly, I also added a few imperfections with my knife and a cocktail stick, some cracks in the slabs, missing sections and depressed slabs due to unseen sinkage in the deep, dark dungeon. If any bits of detail remain around the feet of the model from the slaughter attachment, cover it over with a bit more milliput as you dry fit your models. And with that, the whole team is based. Next, I primed the models using black spray primer through my airbrush and tried out a zenithal prime for the first time. This is a method of getting quick and easy highlight by spraying white from the top down before applying your colours. But after my experiments, I'm not sure if I think it's worth it. Let me know your experiences with zenithal priming in the comments down below, as I know it's something a lot of people swear by. Next, I painted all the orange parts, including the clothing and armour panels. I used a 50-50 mix of Evil Sun Scarlet and Uriel Yellow. This gives a really fiery orange colour. The College of Fire are not known for their subtlety, so I thought this might be appropriate. I used thin layers here to try and make the most out of the zenithal undercoat, but after a few layers I couldn't see anything of the prime below, which is one of the reasons why I probably won't be using this again in the future. I decided to focus on one of all of the races that are contained in the base Dungeon Bowl box, a Gnoblar, an Ogre and a Dwarf. To introduce the first of these, I'm going to hand you back over to our announcer, Dirk Birkenstock.
Thanks, Ollie. Next up, Elgrim Harfinson, a troll slayer of little renown, but now a star in the making in the dungeon. 4 winning touchdowns and the most casualties inflicted last season, though that is only if we include the Dungeon Bowl support staff. Here's the story of how he got his start.
First, I painted the skin with a 50-50 mix of Rhinox hide and Bugman's glow, making sure to get into all the cracks and crevices of the model. I then painted the hair and beard with a Baden black, before painting in some more orange on his trousers. I next came in with Bugman's glow to highlight up the muscles, leaving the original base coat only showing in the areas between muscles and more shadowed areas like the armpits. I then added some Wraithbone into the mix, just enough to make a discernibly different colour, and added this to upturned muscles and more prominent areas. I added additional Wraithbone to the mix, mostly focusing this around the face, picking out the eyebrows, nose and forehead. I also used this on the joints of the fingers. I next dry brushed over the hair and beard using Vallejo Medium Grey. I kept this to the upper portions and ends of the hair, but still used a fairly heavy application of the dry brush. For the final highlight, I added Wraithbone into the grey and did a much lighter dry brush over the very tips of the hairs. Next, I went in for every hobbyist's worst nightmare, the eyes. Taking my brush with the sharpest tip, I base coated these with Wraithbone before shading around the eyeball with thinned down Rhinox hide. This should be at a wash consistency so it flows into the recesses around the eye. Finally, I added the pupil to the eye with a small line of black paint. Using a line instead of a dot helps to avoid the crazy or vacant Clarence eyes you sometimes see on minis. Now it was time for finishing details. Firstly, Rhinox hide for all the leather straps across the model. I did remove him from his base, and slightly horrifyingly, I removed the face portion. He hasn't even made it to the pitch yet, but this did help me to access some of the harder to reach areas and spot some parts that I had missed earlier. As there are a lot of warm tones on these models, I decided to add a bit of contrast with silver for any metal details, including his knuckle duster. While I was looking to mostly use silver, this guy is a dwarf, so in his beard I added some gold bling with Retributor armor. Being a dwarf, he also has a fancy gem in the bottom of his beard, so I painted over this with gunmetal before highlighting up with silver and chrome from Vallejo to emphasize the edges of the gem. To this I added thinned down Araman blue before adding Ardcoat gloss varnish to give it a real shine. I coated the gold areas with Reichland flesh shade, as well as painting the skull on the base and the straps on his kit with Wraithbone. Nuln Oil on all the silver areas and Reichland flesh shade for all the Wraithbone finished that off. The base was coated with grey before being highlighted up with added Wraithbone, and to finish up I added small areas of PVA glue for Mossy Flock and a few drops of blood for the Blood God. I painted the rim of the base black, and with that, Elgrim Harfinson is all ready for the pitch. Back to you, Dirk.
You're scaring me a little with all this Blood God talk, Ollie. Let's talk about our next player, Gogarg the Crumper. Wow, what is there to say about this guy? I mean, literally, what can I say? He's a giant man-eating ogre who hasn't so much as shown an interest in the ball since coming to Dungeon Bowl. He frequently naps in the middle of the game. I will say that as far as blockers go, this guy is top tier, as he's as much of an obstruction when he's awake as he is asleep. Here's his story.
Now the main area remaining on this guy is the skin, so I started again from my 50-50 Rhinox Hide Bugman's Glow mix. As this guy's quite big, I'm going to need to put a big focus onto the skin, so I'm going to be doing multiple layers to make sure I can get smooth transitions. I next went in with Bugman's Glow, using this on the upward facing areas, starting with the chest, and then also doing his face and hands. There are also some little patches of skin around the knees, so make sure you get those as well. You don't have to worry about highlighting them up any further, but you should make sure you get them with your base colour. Next up was a 2-to-1 mix of Bugman's Glow to Wraithbone. I used this to highlight around the face and forehead, as well as all the upturned musculature. For the beard, I base coated with Vallejo Medium Grey, shaded over with Nuln Oil, before then picking back out with a mix of the Medium Grey and Wraithbone. I applied this as a quick and easy dry brush, just to give a little bit more definition to the hair. I painted Wraithbone into the eyes, shaded around with thinned down Rhinox hide, and then again did a line of black just to indicate the pupil. The hand wraps and fur also got a base coat with Wraithbone at this stage, though when I came to shade them, I mixed it up using some Reichland flesh shade, mostly for the hand wraps, and for the fur I used a grey shade made by watering down Vallejo Medium Grey. Now I mentioned previously how the silver is meant to contrast the really warm colour palette of these models, and because this guy has such large areas of warm colour with the skin and the orange armour, you can really see it when I start painting the shield here. I painted all the silver areas with gunmetal from Vallejo, shaded with Nuln Oil, and then highlighted up using silver from Vallejo, but very selectively on the top facing areas. I finished off the base in the same way as the other models, but I added some extra bits of blood for the Blood God onto his hand wraps. I mean, what do you expect from a guy who's literally called Gogarg the Crumper?
Nibbler the Knoblar. This player has a lot of stones for such a little guy. His agility is beyond belief, as learning to avoid a trampling from his teammates every training session has made him one of the most dangerous ball carriers in the league. Let's see how he got here.
In order to paint Nibbler the Nobler, there wasn't much for me to do once the orange was painted, aside from the skin. So I decided to start off by base coating this with a 50-50 mix of War Flesh and Warboss Green. Next, I did a layer of Warboss Green by itself, starting from the easy wins as I like to do, the tops of the ears and the nose, upturned muscles, and the fingers. This colour still went over about 80% of the model, preparing for more selective highlights. A good rule of thumb is, if you're having to struggle to get to an area, don't bother applying the highlight there, as the deeper recesses will still need to be the darker colour. Next up was a 50-50 mix of Warboss Green and Scarsnick Green. This again was applied to the easy wins first, but only focused around the upward facing parts. Speaking of focus, because this model is so tiny, I apologise that I did lose focus on the camera for some of these final details. After finishing up the skin, I painted some Screamer pink into his mouth and sorted out the focus before base coating the teeth with Wraithbone. However, when I tried to paint the eyes, I just got a shot of my hair and completely obscuring what I was doing. The basic principle is exactly the same as I did on the other models, except I only used Evil Sun Scarlet and didn't bother putting in a pupil. They're very similar to what they look like in the Dungeon Bowl box art, with those kind of shifty, glowing red eyes. I stuck this guy back to his base using a little dab of super glue. I did stick this to a cocktail stick before applying it to his foot, just to make sure I didn't end up with too much. I then painted the base in the same way as I have for the rest of the team.
And so there you have it, sports fans. That's all from today on Dungeon Bowl Battle of the Colleges. But join us next time where we'll be checking out those sneaky Skaven, the College of Shadows. In the meantime, please hit the subscribe button, like the video if you have enjoyed it, and my name has been Dirk Birkenstock.
My name has been Ollie,
and thanks for watching.